Saudi Arabia arrests a prominent cleric and his sons, accusing him of criticizing the ruling family. It's part of a number of recent arrests of activists and religious leaders. But how far will this crackdown go? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hashim Ahalbarra. Authorities in Saudi Arabia have arrested prominent preacher and scholar Safar Alhiwali just days after he published a book criticizing the ruling family. Three of his sons, Abdurrahman, Abdullah and Ibrahim, were also detained. Rights groups say Abdurrahman and Abdullah were reportedly taken into custody while attending a family wedding on Wednesday, while Hawali and his son Ibrahim were arrested the following morning. Hawali became known almost 3 decades ago as the leader of the Sahwa movement, which advocated for democracy in Saudi Arabia. He was previously detained for opposing the ruling family. Saudi Arabia under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has launched a crackdown against activists, religious figures and opponents in recent months. In October, the Crown Prince pledged to return his country to what he called moderate Islam and crack down on those he accused of extremism. He said, "We only want to go back to what we were, moderate Islam that is open to the world, open to all religions." 70% of the Saudi people are less than 30 years old, and quite frankly, we will not waste 30 years of our lives in dealing with extremist ideas. We will destroy them today. In September, Saudi authorities arrested dozens of clerics. Activists have posted a list of people who have been detained on social media, including prominent preachers Salman Al-Auda and Awad Al-Qarni. Al-Auda, who has 14 million followers on Twitter, was allegedly detained over his tweets supporting mediation in the crisis between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. The arrests were made ahead of demonstrations organized by exiled opposition figures, but didn't attract much support because of heavy security measures. Human Rights Watch has condemned the arrest as coordinated crackdown on dissent, saying they fit a pattern of human rights violations against peaceful advocates and dissidents. Let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Istanbul, Ahmed Al-Bura'i, a lecturer at Aydin University. In Beirut, Rami Khouri, a senior fellow at the American University of Beirut. And in London, Saeeda Shihabi, columnist with Al-Quds newspaper. Welcome to you all. Ahmed, were the scathing remarks that Safar Alhiwali made in his recent book the main reason why he is in jail, or it was just the tip of the iceberg?
Well, Hashim, the crackdown on dissent didn't start with the arrest of Safar Alhiwali. It started earlier when the Crown Prince started the crackdown on all the dissent, on all the freedom of speech. It is a matter of reform, but it is a matter of superficial reform. What he is doing on the ground is completely contradicting what he's preaching day and night, that the new prince, the new Crown Prince, is trying to bring more freedom to to Saudi Arabia. But by doing these kind of arrests, this kind of crackdown on the dissent, it seems that he is not doing it in the right way. Still, he didn't scratch the surface of the freedom. He is, on the other hand, following the word of advice that was given by his godfather, Mohammed bin Zayed, in the United Arab Emirates, when he told him, if you want to speed up your way to the throne, you need to open communication channel with Israel from the one hand. From the other hand, you need to diminish the influence of the religious establishment in Saudi Arabia, and that's exactly what he's doing and still continuing to do.
Rami, is this part of the same pattern we've seen over the last year, which is basically targeting prominent, outspoken clerics in Saudi Arabia?
Yes, clerics, journalists, women, business people, any independent thinkers who give a viewpoint that is not in line with the government's views, whether it's about Israel or about the US or Yemen or Qatar, whatever it may be. And the striking thing about what Mohammed bin Salman is doing is the vast scope of the reforms, as he calls them, the reforms that he's trying to do. And they are genuine reforms in many ways, especially in terms of more private sector involvement in the economy and things like that. But it's so comprehensive that it has put control of every aspect of life: media, politics, military, economy, religion, social norms. Every aspect of life is in the hands of the Crown Prince. So this is following the pattern of Sisi in Egypt and Gaddafi in Libya before, and Saddam Hussein. And this is troubling because Saudi Arabia never had this kind of leadership before. So this is in keeping with what he's been doing. And the real significance of this is that there are two areas that we really don't know what people's views are. One is in the whole religious establishment, and the second one is really in the public as a whole, including the business establishment. People are afraid to speak out now because they see what happens to people who speak differently than the government, and therefore there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of how much support is there for these reforms. And the terrible irony is that Saudi Arabia needs to make reforms. Some of the reforms that have been identified are really very, very sensible and needed, but most of what has been going on is dropping confidence in the ability of the government to bring about its reforms, including now the apparent delay of the Aramco privatization, which is a centerpiece of this.
Sure. Saeed, Safar Alhiwali rose to prominence in the 80s when he launched the Sahwa movement, which presented itself as an alternative to the Salafi streak of Islam. Is this arrest the sign that the government is determined to clamp down on Sahwa because of its so-called affiliation with the Muslim Brotherhood?
Thank you very much. I think this is symptomatic of it is an indication of the extent of the problems being faced by Mohammed bin Salman. He is at war with everybody. He's at war with his own people, with his own family, with his own household, with his neighbors, with Qatar, with others. He is at war with Palestinians. He is at war with Yemenis. And then he is at war with the people of the awareness of the Sahwa movement in the Arabian Peninsula. Of course, he is at war with the Muslim Brotherhood. Of course, he is at war with Iran. But he is in a strong friendship with Israel. He is at the forefront of safeguarding the Israeli interests in the region. Now, we will have to pay, all our people, whether in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, in Qatar, in Egypt, in Yemen, we will all have to pay the price of this interesting development in our region that we haven't seen for decades. So I think Safar Alhiwali is just another victim of an ambitious young man who is being driven by outside forces.
Ahmed, wasn't this going to be evident, which is a man has a reform as Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. The religious establishment is the most powerful, and ultimately the clash was going to be evident one day or another.
Well, Hashim, I'd like to be the advocate of the devil, if you will, but the point is, if he's trying to do this kind of reform, he's doing what his predecessors used to do. Like King Abdullah, this kind of clashes between the royal family and the religious establishment. It was a kind of a Catholic marriage to some extent, but on the other hand, behind the scenes, you would have this kind of conflict, but they were dealing with it in a subtle, cautious measures in order not to anger the religious establishment because it's still so influential on the ground. But now what Mohammed bin Salman is trying to do, he is trying to appease many establishments, many people in different places. He's trying to appease Israel from the one hand. He's trying also to appease the lobbies in the United States, and he's trying to make the, the business people, the investors in the West in general as happy as he can, because he wants more investment in Saudi Arabia in order to meet the ambitious aspirations that he has. So in order to do this, he thinks that this kind of completely disregarding or completely, like containing the role of the religious establishment would lead to this kind of convincing the West that he is the right person to do this business. But on the other hand, the guy is not doing it in the subtle way as his predecessors used to do it. He's doing it explicitly, and that would anger the population in Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
That would anger the Salafists, because they cannot, promote the policies he's doing to these people that would lead to a kind of radicalization among those young people.
I would like to follow up on that particular idea that you've been talking about, and let me go to Rami. Rami, isn't there any concern of a immediate confrontation between the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the religious establishment, which has been one of the key pillars of the Al Saud dynasty?
Well, he has clearly indicated that he is going to change the way the religious establishment, the formal one as well as the informal one, how they operate. And he wants them to operate under his guidance and his control. Many of them would be willing to do that. You know, all over the Arab world, most religious establishments, the formal Friday preachers in the mosques, are under the authority of the Ministry of Awqaf and Religious Affairs. Many of them have their sermons given to them by the government. So there's a tradition of religious establishment being kind of quietist and going along with the ruling political authority, and they help each other. So there's probably many in the religious establishment in Saudi Arabia who don't mind going along with the government. But the way that he has done it, unilaterally cracking down, arresting very popular people like Hawali and like Auda and others. So the manner in which he's doing this is going to possibly be troubling for him. And then really the critical issue remains, we don't know if members within the royal family may be upset about this as well, because the whole decision-making process of the last 80, 90 years of Saudi statehood, modern statehood, has been upset by this one man. He decided he's going to make decisions and not to have consensus and deliberation and quiet negotiations among the family. And so we'll see. There's so many unknowns now that are there.
Saeed, Rami Khouri has just said that Mohammed bin Salman is upsetting an order that has been going on for quite some time in Saudi Arabia. Saudi, with its wealth, its influence, has been priding itself on being the protector of Sunni Islam. If Mohammed bin Salman goes ahead with dismantling that religious order, would it have any knock-on effect on the religious establishment across the Muslim world, particularly the Sunni world?
Well, I believe that the religious establishment has always been under the armpit of the Saudi, the House of Saud. They have had a long alliance for the past 300 years. So I do not believe that the religious establishment will object or will react negatively against Mohammed bin Salman. Yesterday, driving the car by a woman was a sin. Today, it is something good because the Wali al-Amr, the guardian, says it is good, so it must be good. So I have never seen in the past 200 years that there has been antagonistic stance by the religious establishment vis-a-vis the political house of Al Saud. So I think that this time the war is against the moderate Islam, or what they call the political Islam. Safar Alhiwali, Ayad al-Qarni and others, and many others who have been cracked down against, whether in Saudi Arabia, whether in Egypt, or within in the United Arab Emirates. They are all representing something that the Saudis consider as parallel to their authority or dangerous to their own brand of Islam. But at the same time, it is also symptomatic of the fact that the political Islam itself is on the wane. It's going down. Look at it, how Iran is being fought against, how Muslim Brotherhood are being targeted. So we are seeing a downturn for the political Islam, and then it is taking the sharpest turn in Saudi Arabia.
Ahmed, if you remember when Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was unveiling his Vision 2030, he said basically that we never had an internal problem. All the problems came after the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran, and that's where radicalism set in the country. Do you think this is something that would shape his policy in the near future?
Well, domestically, it's part of what he's trying to do in order to convince the people in Saudi Arabia. He always needs to find this kind of external threat that targeting the Sunni Muslim, and Iran is doing that business quite well for him. He is portraying Iran as the, like the monster of the region, the over-expansionist policy of Iran in the region, whether in Yemen, in Syria, in everywhere in the Gulf countries as well. But the problem is the counter policy that he's using to deter this kind of hegemony is completely reckless and useless. He's doing nothing to prevent what Iran is doing on the ground. And he's trying to tell the people on the ground in Saudi Arabia that what Iran is doing is the main motive behind his actions against these Salafists, which doesn't make any sense. Like, it's a very provocative irony when you compare these young people who are looking up to these scholars, and they think that they are like a Sahwa or the awakening movement, who are calling for more democratic measures on the ground, who did nothing but tweeted certain statements asking for more reform, more freedom of speech, and they end up in jails. And now what's happening? A major failure in Yemen, a major loss in Syria. So they cannot buy into what he's trying to sell them.
Okay, Rami, this is someone who lifted the ban on the women driving, but at the same time jailed women activists who championed the right for women to drive. He took to jail activists, prominent human rights activists, but still his own people say this is a visionary man. How do you see him, a reformer or a Rasputin?
Well, he very clearly is a man of dynamism. He understands that change has to happen for the long-term well-being of Saudi Arabia. Some of his suggested reforms are very sensible in the economic sphere, I think, and some other areas. But the way he has done it, this autocratic way, is creating probably resistance. And also, he doesn't understand something that every single Arab leader in the last 75 years has failed to understand, which is you can't just open a faucet like a water faucet, and you open a reform faucet, say, okay, we're going to reform now, and we're going to let cinemas, or we're going to let drive-in movies, and we're going to let people have concerts and women drive, but that's all, a little bit. You can't do that. These are dealing with human beings. You're dealing with tens of millions of human beings who just want to live normal lives as human beings, and normal life means they want to be able to think for themselves, be involved in public life, not to be revolutionaries or crazy people, but just to be normal people. And the reform process has not necessarily promised normalcy and human dignity. It has simply promised more leisure activities, driving, cinemas, more malls, cell phones, and privatization of companies. So there's a fundamental weakness in the nature of the reform process, because it was not based on any serious consultation with the citizens of Saudi Arabia. And this is the problem that every Arab leader has made. We should watch Jordan now if they start doing serious reforms. Morocco, possibly, Algeria, possibly. They're all good prospects for reforms that have to be done. Egypt decided it didn't want to reform. But so Mohammed bin Salman, I think, is a genuine reform-minded person who doesn't know how to do reform. And McKinsey is not going to show him how to do that.
Okay, Saeed, are you of the same view that without going into profound changes of the Saudi society itself, we're not going to see any renaissance in the near future if he continues down this path?
Well, I do not believe that Mohammed bin Salman is a reformist in any sense, because before him, we heard that King Abdullah would be a reformist, but we saw nothing of reform during the reign of Abdullah. So I believe he is a brutal dictator. Yes, he is cunning in a sense, but he is also getting advice. I think he is mainly driven by Israeli advisors and American advisors. So I do not believe. I think he has he has succeeded, for example, in pacifying Iraq, for example, and also in pacifying Sudan. He got them on board to a large extent. But at the same time, he has antagonized his own people. He has antagonized his own neighbors. He's at war with Yemen. He's at war with Qatar. He's at war with the people of Bahrain, whom he has invaded in 2011. He is at war with the people of Egypt, with the largest Islamic movement in the Arab world, the Muslim Brotherhood. So he is implementing an agenda that had been devised by the Western agencies, mainly CIA, under President Trump, and also under Netanyahu. And it is clear now that Netanyahu is in the driving seat of the regional politics, using and exploiting Donald Trump.
But then, and let me go to Ahmed al-Bura'i. You have many people in Saudi Arabia, particularly young people, saying basically this is someone who is committed to diversifying the economy, putting an end to the old political institutions that have prevailed for many years, and that Saudi Arabia could generally become a vibrant democracy in the near future under MBS.
Well, Hashim, nobody in the Middle East would like to refuse this kind of wishful thinking, I would say, or pipe dreams. The actions on the ground, like actions, are much louder than words. What's he doing to Egypt? What's he doing by supporting the autocracy of dictator like Sisi in Egypt? What's he doing with the betrayal, as Safar Alhiwali, the recently detained scholar, called it, betrayal to the Palestinian cause by communicating with the Israelis, by approaching the Israelis differently? What's he doing to the Qataris, their brothers in blood and neighbors? What's he doing to the Yemenis? And what's he doing with the West in general, with Donald Trump, with the investment he is doing? This doesn't give any sign that this guy is good in terms of bringing in any kind of change to the Saudi Arabia, to the hopes of the people on the ground. It's merely superficial reforms that didn't do any genuine. It's again, as Rami said, it's a kind of entertainment. It's just a kind of luxurious things that the people are not looking for. They're looking for genuine changes in terms of democracy, in terms of stability, in terms of real job creation on the ground.
Rami, you seem to be saying basically, most of you, that these are all cosmetic changes and that the clampdown is part of an autocratic streak into the country. From your own perspective, Rami, what do you think should be the indicators of a genuine reform in Saudi Arabia? Please, in less than a minute.
Well, you're going to have to look at the response of the business community. You're going to have to look at explicit public support from the royal family members, very few of whom have spoken out. You have to look at the religious establishment, again, explicit public support. The problem is that people in Saudi Arabia don't speak out if they're critical of the government. They're afraid, as they are in most Arab countries. So that's what I look for, public expressions. And this is something that's going to have to become more clear in the next 6 months or so. Just one last quick point. The idea of getting closer to Netanyahu is fascinating because we know from public opinion polls that most of the people in the Arab world, about 80%, are against normalizing ties with Israel until the Palestine issue is resolved equitably. So we need to see more clarity on that issue too. But the key point is the Saudi people need to be involved in the process to make it work. And we want it to work. Everybody wants it to work.
We'll leave it on that note. Ahmed al-Bura'i, Rami Khouri, Saeed al-Shihabi, thank you very much indeed for your insights and for your time. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashim Ahalbara, and the whole team here. Bye for now.